All right. Okay. All right. It's 10:05 and we're going to go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the inaugural Gunter-Gooding DEI lecture series in nursing. All right, let's see. We can advance the slides here. One quick minute. Oh, there we are. So again, good morning to the Gunter-Gooding DEI lecture series. I begin all of my conversations or talks with this quote: "Of all the forms of inequity, injustice in healthcare is the most shocking and inhumane of all," by Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. It grounds the work that I do in social health justice and really underscores a lot of the reason for this inaugural lecture series. I am Dr. Sheldon Fields. I'm the inaugural Associate Dean for Equity and Inclusion and a research professor here in the Ross and Carol Neese College of Nursing at Penn State University. I also have the distinct and absolute honor to serve as the first Vice President of the National Black Nurses Association. We are absolutely delighted that you have chosen to spend a few moments with us today for this important lecture series. As a land-grant institution, we want to start by our land acknowledgement statement. The Pennsylvania State University campuses are located on the original homelands of the Erie, Haudenosaunee, Seneca, Cayuga, Onondaga, Oneida, Mohawk, Tuscarora, Lenape, Delaware, Shawnee, Asante, Easton, Oklahoma, Susquehannock, and Wazazi Osage nations. As a land-grant institution, we acknowledge and honor the traditional caretakers of these lands and strive to understand and model their responsible stewardship. We also acknowledge the longer history of these lands and our place in that history. So one of the things that I want to do, and I want to do it up front, is to thank a few people. And I want to thank the Multicultural Student Nursing Association and our really great colleagues in our Paul Robeson Cultural Center here at Penn State for co-sponsoring the event today. I also want to thank all those people that work behind the scenes. It really does take a village to put together anything of this endeavor. So here you see listed a bunch of folks that have been working behind the scenes to make sure this is everything from the administrative staff to our support staff, to other staff members here in the College of Nursing at Penn State. So thank you all. So one of the things that I want to also acknowledge is, how are you going to get your CEUs today? For those of you who are nurses, you must attend the whole hour presentation of Dr. Alexander, which will start at 11 a.m. And to receive it, you must attend the full program and complete the evaluation provided at the end of the program. We are an accredited provider of CEs from the ANCC, and the topic is non-clinical, so we didn't do disclosures, but you will receive a link at the end of the presentation and follow the link to claim your CE certificate. Okay, 1 minute. So before I bring up our dean for her greeting, I want to acknowledge and talk about the reason why this series came about and just who is Dr. Gunter and Dr. Gooding. Dr. Gunter and Dr. Gooding were both former African-American women who were directors of the College of Nursing here at Penn State. Dr. Gunther being the director from 1971 to 1976, and Dr. Gooding being the director from 1985 to 1987. And the reason for naming the lecture series in their name is to acknowledge that history that we have here at Penn State and the phenomenal leaders that came before. And even though we do a lot of work and we have really done a great deal to work on the diversity, equity, inclusion issues within our college and in our university, the naming of this lecture series to honor their legacy, I think, is actually quite appropriate. And I really want to thank the dean before I bring her up and introduce her for her steadfast support of not only the office of the Associate Dean for Equity and Inclusion, but even when I brought the idea of this series to her, she was immediately supportive and said, create it, go with it, we'll figure it out. So that is the type of leader that we're really blessed to have here at Penn State. And I really would like for you all to meet her. So without further ado, I want to bring to the podium for her greetings and remarks, the Dean of the College of Nursing here at Penn State, Professor and Dean Lori Badzik.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for attending today's sessions that will culminate with a wonderful lecture. And I just want to say that our mission within our college is around leadership. And there are many places where we do lead the way. But when we talk about equity and inclusion, diversity, belonging, we have played a bit of a catch-up game, both at Penn State and within our college. But I can say that the future is really bright. We're so fortunate to have Sheldon and to have a wonderful speaker today in Dr. Alexander, who will continue to move us along. As all of you know, diversity, inclusion is a big part of our code of ethics for nurses. When we did the last revision, we were very conscious of adding words to really underscore that in nursing, we take care of everyone. And so we have to cut across and we have to be better and do better. So I want to also share with you that just recently, I asked our faculty and staff in our college for another reason to describe us today and to describe us in the future in 3 words. And one of the words in the future was that they wanted to be diverse. So diverse and diversity showed up in where we are going. And I say many times every month to people that we can now see diversity in our college. When I arrived here, it was very hard to pick out, but thanks to the good work of our associate deans, our admissions office, and in particular, our associate dean for equity and inclusion, we have changed the diversity of our college and we are getting better. So we're not best, but we're better. And I do think in this area, we now can say we are trying very hard to lead the way and be different. And so I just, again, want to welcome all of you to be here. I want you to know that we are definitely focusing on these issues. Our new administration continues to be focused on these issues, even more focused on these issues. You know, we have the first female leader of color at our university in our history. So, you know, I think the landscape is changing. Last night I had occasion to have dinner with Dr. Alexander and a small group of leaders across the university. It was a wonderful time of sharing. And, you know, the world is a very difficult place right now, not just for nursing, but for those who are working in this area, trying to do better. We are all struggling with the issues of our time. And so I hope today will add to all of our consciousness, our learning, our thinking about what we are trying to do here in the Ross and Carolyn East College of Nursing, as well as what we are trying to do across nursing and our world, because we do say we're trying to change health of the world at Penn State as we create leaders in all areas and at all levels of nursing. So as we look forward to doing that, this is a big part of that work. So Sheldon, thank you for allowing me to welcome everyone and to make a few comments. And I really look forward to today.
Thank you, Dean Badzik. So before we get to our main speaker, there is going to be a presentation from our leaders within the Multicultural Student Nursing Association. And this is really important because the MSNA was one of the groups that when I initially started my position here, almost 2 years almost 2 years, 2 years and what's today, four days, that reached out to me in terms of helping to make sure that they were established and doing meaningful program that meant a lot to them. So I had the occasion this past summer to, with the help of Aldine's office and the friends of NBNA, to take 3 students to the National Black Nursing Association's National Conference in the city of Chicago. So they're going to talk about that experience. Let me make sure. All right. So. All right. See, it's right here. Let's click right there. Mm-hmm. Click the little button, maybe it'll advance. So I'll let them introduce themselves and I'll turn it over to them.
Hello, my name is Jacqueline.
I'm Alex, and we are the co-presidents of the Multicultural Student Nursing Association. And today we are here to do our recap of the National Black Nurses Association annual conference that we attended this summer.
Tell me mine.
Okay. Okay, so hi, like I said, my name is Jacqueline. I'm a first-generation college student from Harrisburg, PA. I'm in my 3rd year of nursing, and I'm possibly looking at a career in either the emergency department, critical care, or travel nursing.
Hello, can y'all hear me?
We can, Mamadi.
Hello, my name is Mamadi Kroma. I'm also a first-generation college student. I'm from Philadelphia, PA. I'm in my 3rd year of nursing school, and I'm the only Black male in the class of 2024. And at the nursing school, I'm thinking about pursuing a career in CRNA.
And Mamadi is joining us on Zoom because he's at Hershey right now. Again, I'm Alexandra. I'm a 2nd year student from Fairfax, Virginia. I also maintain a minor in diversity and inclusion and health and human development. And I am interested in a career in women's health and would like to eventually become a nurse practitioner.
Okay, so to start off, we just kind of wanted to read the NBNA mission statement. So the National Black Nurses Association's mission is to provide a forum for collective action by African-American nurses to advocate and implement strategies to ensure access to the highest quality of health for people of color.
So just to do a conference overview, the theme of this year's conference was bridging the gap of social injustice and health disparities through excellence in nursing, practice, education, and research. So it was in Chicago, Illinois, which was a great opportunity for all 3 of us because we had never been to Chicago before. So we had the opportunity to explore a new city. There was roughly 5,000 attendees this year with over 100 chapters represented. And this was the first in-person conference post-COVID. So as you can imagine, there was a lot of excitement around the conference. There was a lot of corporate support and sponsorship, and there was a huge social media presence. So along the bottom of the screen are some of the examples of the posts that really got people excited before the conference. And to the right, as you can see, that's one of Dr. Field's posts. And as he mentioned, he is the first vice president of the National Black Nurses Association. And he served as a wonderful host for us throughout the week. So one of the key themes of the conference was defining the meaning of health equity and the principles associated with it. So health equity is the assurance of the conditions for optimal health for all people. But what's really important is to understand the principles associated. So one, providing resources according to need, valuing all individuals and populations equally, and recognizing and rectifying historical injustices. This photo was also used throughout the conference to really illustrate the difference between equality and equity, which is very important. So as you can see, equality is shown at the top where each individual received the same bike. The lady on the right uses a wheelchair, so she cannot use that bike. The bike is a little bit too small for him, so he's hunched over. The bike works fine for the woman, but it's for the little boy, it's obviously way too big for him. So at the bottom, equity is shown where the lady in the wheelchair receives a bike that she can pedal with her hands. And the man receives a bike that fits him, and the boy receives a children's bike. So equity is really just recognizing that each individual has their own needs. So here at Penn State, we spend a lot of time focusing on ways to treat and support the needs of our patients. So as nurses and future nurses, we have to apply this principle on a broader spectrum, and it needs to become a part of who we are so that patients will be comfortable entering the healthcare system and trust us with their care. So the goal here is to move into an equity mindset.
With that being said, and how we're being taught in our nursing courses about preparing a really patient-centered care plan, a part of that would be equity. So like in the graph here, if you get a cut, equality would be getting a cut and getting a Band-Aid. A broken leg would be a Band-Aid. A broken heart would be a Band-Aid. Where everybody has individual needs, equality doesn't necessarily help. But when everybody knows what morals, what values, how they want to be treated as a patient, like we're learning here, equity is kind of what stands in more. So if you get a cut, you get your Band-Aid. You have a broken leg, a cast is more necessary. And a broken heart is loving and kindness. That's how we would treat that.
So these are just our overall conference takeaways.
So for me, one of the biggest conference takeaways was just getting to see other people that look like me at this conference. As I said already, I was the only, hello?
Go ahead, Mamadi, continue talking.
As I said, I was the only Black male in the class of 2024. So coming into nursing school, I didn't get to see, until Dr. Fields came, I didn't get to see anyone that really looked like me. But as you can see in the picture to the left, every single one of those men are role models to me as the nurse I want to become in the future. For example, we got to see Dr. Ernest Grant, and Dr. Phil always said he was like he was a tall man, and then you don't really get to see it until you see him in person. He was actually like 7 foot tall. And he's also the first male to be president of ANA. And then I got the privilege to see Dr. Kendall. He's the president in the Louisiana State Board of Nursing. Dr. Kendall also, after one of his seminars, talked to me personally and just wanted to be a mentor. He actually gave me his personal number, and it just showed like how everyone at the conference cared about you individually as a person and just you as a nursing student. I also got the chance to meet Dr. Eric J. Williams. He was the first male president of NBNA. And that's honestly just to name a few. As you can see in the picture to the left, every single one of those males in that picture are extinguished Black male nurses. And that was really cool for me to see. Another really important event for me was the Men Bow Tie Brunch. This highlighted men's health disparities with some topics that went like from cancer, prostate, colon, lungs, uninsured versus underinsured, hypertension, cardiovascular diseases, lack of access to care, mental health, and just different things that affect like the Black community as a whole. They also talked about their experiences as nursing leaders in each of their respective areas. And one of the major themes that I seen throughout the whole conference was inclusion. They just wanted to make people feel, no matter what group you from or no matter who you were, they wanted to make you feel a part of the, they wanted to make you feel a part. From the Band-Aid, the different skin complexions, they showed different Band-Aids for different people of color, Black males, health disparities, health equity instead of health equality, and just ensuring every person was well represented and included.
Okay, so should I move this back up? Oh, that is not good. There was a lot of opportunities, as I mentioned, presented to us as students throughout the conference. One of the highlights for us was accidentally stumbling upon the MBNA Knowledge Bowl. We were actually leaving another session and we just ran into it. We were like, oh, this looks cool. And they were like, oh, do you want to join? So we ended up playing multiple rounds of the Knowledge Bowl with students from the University of Pittsburgh. And we ended up winning against a lot of. Oh, okay. Okay, yeah, so we ended up winning the conference, not the conference, the Knowledge Bowl, sorry. And we walked away with $300 cash prize each. And it was a great experience. And it was really fun to know that our nursing coursework is paying off and we're able to win against nurses who have been in this career for 20, 30 plus years. So that was a lot of fun. We also had the opportunity to network with nurses of all levels. As I just mentioned, we played the Knowledge Bowl with students from Pitt, which was a lot of fun. We got to talk about nursing school with them and share experiences, but we also got to network with a lot of professionals who have been in this career for a long time and could provide us specific opportunities. In this photo in the middle is Dr. Lena Gold, and she is the founder of Diversity CRNA, which is a mentorship program for CRNAs and aspiring CRNAs, which again was especially important to Mamadi because he is interested in a career in nurse anesthesia. So he was able to find a mentor. And lastly, we discussed diversity and inclusion in a way that isn't fully covered in our nursing coursework. And that photo is Dr. Fields giving one of his lectures on DE&I, which he was very passionate about and really showed us a new perspective on DE&I.
Okay, with that being said, a part of one of the lectures that we attended and a part that I felt that I should put out here was they mentioned a lot of figures in African-American history that are influential nurses. So I just put a few of them here on the slides and I'll explain what a few of them did. So right here to my left is Mary Seacole, who was a British Jamaican nurse who established the British Hotel during the Crimean War, which was actually the same time as Florence Nightingale. And the reason she decided to establish the British Hotel instead of being a nurse is because she actually applied to work as a nurse and they denied her. So she didn't let that take her down and she created her own way to service those soldiers who were injured and who needed recovery. In the middle on the top is also Mary Eliza Mahoney, who was the first African-American woman to earn a professional learning license in the United States. And then afterwards, she campaigned to increase nursing education in people of color and fought against discrimination in the nursing field. To the bottom left is Ada Bell Samuel Thomas, who co-founded the National Association of Colored Graduate Nurses. She successfully campaigned for Black nurses to serve in the American Red Cross and the Army Nurse Corps in World War I. And to the middle, bottom right, is Harriet Tubman, who a lot of people know her as an abolitionist. She helps free the slaves. But another part of what she did was during the Civil War, she actually was a Union nurse who did treat Black African-American soldiers and liberated slaves during that time. And then most recently, to my right, is Ernest J. Grant, who was the first male president of ANA, who happens to be Black, and he was named Nurse of the Year for treating burn victims after the 9/11 attacks. A little bit more of what we got to do was under the 40 event, which was sponsored by Vitas Health. There was a lot of things that we were able to do. When we walked in, that picture in the middle is kind of what we got to see in a series of balloons. It was really cool. It was very sought after, like everybody who was over 40 wanted to be there. So we knew that it had to be something that we should look forward to. And when we walked in, there was a series of activities we were able to do. So one of them was a 360 photo booth, which we had never been in, and it was pretty fun to experience that. And that's the picture to my left of all of us in the photo booth. And as well as we got to experience a Chicago style buffet for the first time for me. And to our right, there's a picture that says present, and that was part of a timeline display of NBNA's history. And it went following a theme of past, present, and future. And we were there for the future part, which was the under 40. As future nurses, we were spoken to about how we are paving the way for nursing in the future. And as nurses of colors and minority communities, we have a duty and a responsibility to advocate for our patients of ethnic backgrounds and our communities of ethnic backgrounds in the healthcare system. We all know that there are health disparities that come into play with different communities, whether it's Hispanic, whether it's African American, whether it's Native Americans, whether it's Pacific Islanders, whether it's Asian Americans. There's different levels of health disparities to each one of us, and as people of nurses of ethnic backgrounds, our duty is to bridge those gaps and to treat our patients the way we would want our family members to be treated, and to treat our patients with equity. Another thing we got to experience was the career fair, which was also another, I want to say, unique experience. I've been to career fairs before, but this one was huge. Some of the people we got to see there were Band-Aid, CeraVe, Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer. Penn State was there. We got to see Cody. He was manning the table. Each one of these had their own way of attracting people, and I found that cool. So Band-Aid is one of the main sponsors for NBNA. They provide a lot of the funding, and when me and Alex were there, we were just walking around and we looked, and they were giving out free massages. Like, that's how they were attracting people to see their booth, to talk to them. And we were like, free massages, okay. And on top of free massages, we got free frappuccinos, lattes, free lattes with a little Band-Aid on top of it. It was so cute. CeraVe also had their own way of attracting us, which was they were giving out boxes of like skincare for the students and free samples of La Roche, is that what it's called? La Roche. And there was just a lot of different things going on, and I found it a cool experience. There was also other universities there looking for prospective students. And of course, we went to the Penn State table. We found out a little bit more about the doctorate program, which was interesting for us.
Okay, so again, there was a lot of different influential figures and moments present at the conference. To your left is Dr. Betty Smith Williams, and she is one of the last living founders of the National Black Nurses Association. She is 93 years young, and she was full of life. She, in this photo, was actually hosting the opening ceremony, welcoming all 100+ chapters that were at the conference this year. And I actually had the opportunity to meet her, and I have a picture with her, which is super cool. And that's on another slide. And then the other photo is Dr. Ernest Grant, the president of the American Nurses Association, giving an award to Dr. Martha A. Dawson on behalf of ANA to NBNA for their 50th anniversary, which was a great moment to witness. And yeah. So overall, these are our 3 key takeaways from the conference. We felt inspired by all of the moments and figures we were able to see throughout the conference. We felt represented to sit in a room with 5,000 other nurses that looked like us. And we were so grateful for the opportunity to attend such a conference and all the opportunities that were provided for us throughout. So this is all the past leadership, current leadership of the National Black Nurses Association during the opening ceremony.
And then we're reaching the end of our presentation, but here in this picture, Dr. Field is there. He's part of the Greater NYC chapter, which in this particular picture, they were earning the award for Grand Chapter with the most male members, which was a big award that they were presented, and it speaks a lot about how this association in general is helping to build a more representative nursing. I don't want to say staff because they don't work for them, but nursing workforce, yes.
So thank you all for listening to us. We wanted to again thank the Dean and the Friends of the National Black Nurses Association Fund for sponsoring and funding this trip for us. And thank you. We'll leave time for questions if anybody has any.
All right. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So we do have time for questions. And I'm going to look at the chat here and see who has questions in the chat for the students. I will tell you all that they didn't tell me they won $300 until after the fact, you know, running around with all that money in Chicago. They did tell me they won. They just told me how much they won. But it's fine. It's all good. But again, this was really made possible by the generosity of our dean who covered all of their travel expenses. And I say that, and I want to repeat that because it really goes to the true commitment that we have here at Penn State of giving our students experiences beyond the classroom. And the registration fees were all covered by the Friends of NBNA so that the students were able to attend. So while I'm looking for questions in the chat, does anyone have questions in the audience for the students? Anybody?
So is there an actual natural weapon for years?
So the question in the audience is there a National Black Nursing Association student group? Well, I'll answer that since I'm an officer in the group. That's not how NBNA actually organizes its chapters. In terms of students are able to join any of the over 100 chapters of NBNA. And you can join at large. You can be an at-large member, or in the case of Alexandra, so come a moment, what chapter did you join?
The Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Area Chapter,
Right, because you're from
Fairfax, Virginia.
right, and that's the chapter that's close to her.
Yeah.
So we encourage students to join chapters, you know, near their home. So this way, even when they graduate, they'll be able to interact with the chapter, go back and be members of the chapter full time. But one of the major benefits of becoming a student member is the mentorship, is the exposure that they're able to give students at a very early age in their nursing education. And as most people who know me knows, membership has its privilege. And I tell students all the time, join as a student because you attended the scholarship. They all attended our scholarship and awards luncheon. We gave out over $300,000 in scholarships to students. And we'll do the same thing next year through a lot of partnerships, corporate sponsorships, universities that give outright full scholarships to students. We work with about 3 universities that do that. So yeah, become a student member. Just might help with that tuition bill. All right. Any other questions in the audience or questions online? So there is one from Dr. Kelly Wolgass. Could each student talk about any nurse influences in their families or experiences in healthcare that have led them to choose nursing?
So like I said, I'm actually a first generation, so I'm the first nurse in my family. My mom used to take care of older people, but she never got a certificate in it or anything like that, so it's mainly me. Some healthcare experiences that I've had that led me to choose nursing had a lot to do with how I grew up. English is my second language. I was born here in the US, but my family, we lived in New York. So in New York, New York City, we didn't need to know English necessarily. Once I started school, I had to. And then once I knew English, I became the translator in my family. And that included going to doctor's appointments. So I remember being like 8 and sitting in the doctor's office with my grandma, and they were explaining to me diabetes. And then I had to explain to my grandma what diabetes is. And I was 8, I didn't really know. I was just telling her, I was like, I think you have sugar in your blood and they're saying that it's too high. And I was like, I don't know if that's supposed to be there because I didn't know. And that kind of exposed me to the rest of healthcare in my family. Some members of my family also for a long time did not have health insurance. So I had to watch them not go to the doctor when they needed to go to the doctor because they didn't have that. And growing up with those experiences, it helped me choose nursing because I know I want to advocate for those people, for people in my community. And then I also grew up in a more, I don't mean to choke up, in a more impoverished community with a lot of Asians, a lot of African Americans, and then a lot of Hispanics. So we got to see a very different side to healthcare, and I wanted to bring the better side of healthcare into my community and back to my family. So that's why I decided to choose nursing.
I don't have any nurses in my family, and I also don't have as interesting of a story as Jackie. But I did grow up hearing from family members and other people who look like me being scared or not comfortable with the healthcare system. And so from a young age, I always knew that I wanted to go into healthcare and make sure that I advocated for patients that looked like me.
Go ahead, Mamadi.
For me, I was actually born with sickle cell anemia. So growing up, I was in the hospital a lot as a kid. And my parents I had to stay weeks on end sometimes at the hospital, and my parents couldn't always stay with me. And being a kid so young in the hospital is a scary place. And the nurses really made me feel welcome. They helped me do my homework sometimes, different things like that. And that was truly one of the biggest reasons why I wanted to become a nurse. Like my nurse Brown from CHOP, I still have her number today. When I graduated from high school, I texted telling her I graduated. So connections like that is truly what I want to build as a nurse. And that's why I want to become a nurse.
All right. Thank you. All right. All right. Let's see if there's any other questions. Dr. Canty, Lucinda Canty, what advice would each of you give to a student that is not sure they want to join NBNA, I'm assuming? And that's Lucinda, Dr. Lucinda Canty, who's asking that question.
Okay. If you're not sure if you want to join, the only thing I have to say to you is you should. I think that we pretty much covered all of the amazing benefits of membership in NBNA. And as Dr. Field said, there's $300,000 on the table for us, and college is expensive, as we all know. So you could get some help with that. We met people from all over the United States, and the support that we felt, I cannot even put into words. They said, oh, well, if you're ever in Atlanta, join our chapter and we got you, and we'll get you a job and we'll make sure that you're supported. So now that I know that if I was to move anywhere, I have support through NBNA, and they really were making sure that even though this is our first conference, we continue to attend and we continue to be the future of nursing.
I would also say, just join. I was honestly a little hesitant to begin with also. It took me a little bit to respond to Dr. Fields' email. But once I did respond and once we were there, I realized that it was so worth it. It was really empowering. It was really inspiring more than anything. I left there really feeling like I have a purpose in nursing and I know what I want to do and I know why I'm doing it now. So I would say definitely join. As a student, you don't necessarily have to pay the full fees. It's at a discounted. So if that's what you're worried about, that's fine.
All right. All right. Any other questions here in the audience while I look online for any? There's lots of comments here about thanking the students for sharing their experiences. Okay. Well, I really want to thank Alexandra, Mamadi, and Jackie for not only attending, but for being brave enough to get up here today and present and talk about their experiences and to share with you all, what they were able to experience. We do have a commitment to continue to take students to the annual conference. Next year, Alexandra is actually in Atlanta. For more information, you can simply go to nbna.org for more information about our organization. So any last comments from any of the students? Okay, I think they want to get off the stage. All right, so again, thank you. And thank you all for staying with us online. We are gonna do a quick transition, so give me one moment. And before I bring her out, because we're running a little ahead of schedule, I want to talk about the speaker that we were very fortunate to bring here to Penn State to give this inaugural address for the Gunter-Gooding DEI speaker series. Dr. G. Rumey Alexander, I first encountered Dr. Alexander we figured out last night at dinner 20 years ago when I was an assistant professor at the University of Rochester. So this is how long, and her work preceded that Dr. Alexander has been doing work in the diversity, equity, inclusion space. Now, we know that these issues have been brought to the forefront more recently because of the issues related to everything that happened post the death of George Floyd, to the worldwide pandemic that we all have lived through and survived, that further shone a light on the issues related to diversity within healthcare. But she was doing this work for a very long time. She was one of the first major diversity associate deans of a school or college of nursing when she assumed that role at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. She actually then went on to be the chief diversity officer of the entire university. She currently still works at Chapel Hill, but in the capacity of professor of nursing, as well as assistant dean of relational excellence in the Adams School of Dentistry. So again, like I said, there's quite a bit that I could say about Dr. Alexander. And when you all scanned, you got access to her full bio. She is a fellow of the American Academy of Nursing. And, I know people say this a lot, but, she is one of the GOATs, greatest of all times, not a bad thing. When it comes to this space, I cannot tell you how incredibly honored I am when I call to ask Dr. Alexander if she would consider coming to share with us her vast experience. She didn't hesitate. She immediately said yes. And we worked out the logistics to make sure that she got to Penn State. So I'm going to, all right. I'm going to bring up all right. Hold on one moment. I need to bring up her presentation. Okay, so you all should be able to see that. So without any further ado, I bring you Dr. Jirume Alexander.
Good morning. I am indeed happy to be here. I'm happy to be with a good friend. At least he didn't call me an old goat. He just called me a goat. It is indeed always a privilege and an honor to engage people in conversation and just tell you what I think might be helpful to you to think about. I don't have all the answers, but I do know something about those things which one needs to think about if they're going to be in this space of equity and taking care of all people. And so it is with that mindset that I've prepared this presentation. There are a couple of things I want to say to you before we get started, and I thought that would help with context. Okay, so that you know where I'm coming from. One is, I believe all stories lead us to where we are now. So we have to pay attention to stories. Stories are an important part of data, just like quantitative data is. We need to hear people's stories and not just hear them, but seek to understand. That tells us a lot about each other, why one's experiences are important, and how that causes us to treat or not treat or mistreat others. Secondly, when I define diversity, I use an approach that's much more global than just the specifics. We often talk about diversity as race or gender or generational difference or physical ability or sexuality or sexual orientation. Sometimes we talk about it in terms of body alterations. And what I mean by that is in the literature that's often referred to as whether we're ear piercings, hairstyles, body size, tattoos, all things that cause us to quickly decide things about others. So the definition I want you to consider as I continue to share with you today is holding multiple perspectives without judgment. That's the definition I want you to think about. Holding multiple perspectives without judgment. The differences in perspectives are fine. We live in a world where we don't particularly like those differences of perspective. We're kind of polarized with our thinking. And you know, if you don't think the way I think or see it the way I see it, then I don't want to hear it. But the diversity of thought brings about better decisions and brings about a better world because you've got multiple perspectives to consider. So it's not the multiple perspectives that get us in trouble. It is the judgments about them. Who's superior, who's inferior, who's better than, who's less than, who should have, who ought to have, who shouldn't get, who's human, who's not human, who's legitimate, who's not legitimate, who's competent, and who's not competent. So this holding multiple perspectives without judgment is an important way to think about it. Diversity, the word alone, is about the ways in which we differ. But when we operationalize diversity, we're talking about holding those multiple perspectives. So I can hold his perspective or your perspective and still have my perspective as well. Doesn't mean I have to change everything about me to fit into somebody else's world. but it would be smart for me to understand it and to try to learn more about it. Secondly, I'm going to define culture in the ways that I like to think about it. And this is going to date me, but it's okay. And if I name something you haven't heard before, then you can Google it and listen to it. My colleagues from last night are laughing about this because that was one of our conversations. I want you to think about culture in terms of a definition as what the temptations, the great philosophers, the temptations, talk about it. It is about the way you do the things you do. Whether that's decision-making, strategic planning, resource allocation, who has the power, who doesn't have the power. So the way you do the things you do are an important piece. Thank you so much. Does that help you all see that better? That's great. Thank you. And then I want you to think about culture, just kind of adding on to that in another way. I want to start by telling a story. There seems to be that there were two fish swimming in the ocean. They were very young fish and they were just kind of swimming around. And a older fish, let's just, rather than call the older fish old, let's call it the chronologically gifted fish, just happened to pass these two younger fish in the water. And as this generationally gifted fish passed them, he said, "Good morning, boys. How's the water?" And kept swimming. One of the younger fish said to the older fish, "What the hell is water?" The bottom line is they're swimming in the water and not seeing it. It's their norm. It's their way of being. It's their tradition. It's the automatic pilot kind of thing. And so the bottom line is, when you don't pay attention to the water, as long as it stays the same temperature, you could be swimming into things that don't work for everybody, that don't necessarily work for you as you evolve and change. And so that whole story is around, we have to pay attention to culture. How we do what we do, the ways in which we do it. Do we know why we do it? And are we perpetuating something that no longer works? Because the world has changed, the people we care for have changed, the decision makers have changed. So with those three pieces of context, let me just walk you through a few things. I often hear people ask me, why now? Why are we talking about this now? And I've given you a few ideas up here about why that is. If we don't talk about it in the educational space, we are going to practice malpractice. We're going to set people up not to give the best care to everyone, which is what health equity is about. Another way of thinking about health equity is that you give people what they need, when they need it, in the way they need it. So it is not a one size fits all. This is an important distinction when we're dealing with the business of health versus the business of healthcare. The business of healthcare is the financial and the rules, the regs, the political stuff. But you and I are in the business of health. And that requires this ability, this capacity to advocate, to hold the courageous dialogues, to call people in, not just call them out, but call them in, to make a better designed way of caring for all. And quite frankly, you can hardly turn these days without somebody talking about social determinants of health. Seems sometimes that they get substituted or used as a way to divert from talking about what are the real upstream issues that created the social determinants of health. That's kind of starting in the middle rather than starting up at the top. about what happened, who made the decisions, how they were made, who was included, who was not included. That created downstream the people's lives, their ways of being, where they move and have their being. And so we have to think about the upstream pieces as well as what's happening downstream to have that bigger picture. People are dying, and we need to acknowledge this because of disparities and inequity. And we do take care of people all along the spectrum, from birth to death. But we're talking about the quality of life and how we help people navigate and manage in a space that often they lose power in the moment they walk through the doors. The water changes. And so this is part of the work of all of us in the health space, but you all know that we spend more time with patients than anybody else. We are the surveillance system for patients. And if we're not up on what's going on, they're really in danger. So we get to not only call in those who care for them, but we get to call in about the rules and the policies and the ways of being, the experience that people are in. And quite frankly, we need more of us. So this is also a discussion about who are going to be the future nurses, the future faculty, the community leaders, the legislators. This is everybody's work. Everybody in the organization, not just Dr. Fields' work because he holds the title of being your lead diversity officer, or your dean, who is certainly giving ample attention to what is occurring. But I will tell you, she's gonna need more and he's gonna need more. Everybody, all hands on deck. This is about resource allocation. When we talk about diversity, what it requires is money, time, and people. This is part of what I mean by resource allocation. So why not do it now? Because quite frankly, it is the heart of a lot of what's going on in our world at this moment. So if you've not read Isabel Wilkerson's work, I suggest you do. Her book Cast, if you've not read it, would be a wonderful thing for perhaps a book club or a discussion with faculty, staff, students. And what she says is that things have morphed a little bit. People have gotten a little bit smarter about how they express their fears, particularly as it relates to difference. So she says it's insidious and that it's powerful because it's not hatred and it's not necessarily personal. It's it's that culture I talked about, that worn groove of comforting routines and that unthinking of our expectations and patterns of social order. And pretty soon, if you institute it long enough and you care about it, and you keep feeding it, it becomes the natural order of things. It's kind of like that water I talked about with the fish. You don't notice it, and yet it is a powerful, powerful entity. Some people talk about this as civilized oppression. We're still oppressing people. And by the way, whenever oppression occurs, it's because there is the presence or a sense of unequalness. Somebody's higher, somebody's lower, they've got the power and they can press down. It's that opportunity to press down, oppression. So that inequity is playing itself out. And here's what that looks like in terms of the effects of health. The one thing that we say we're not about, and that is increasing the human suffering. We're really about, or at least we say we are in the pledges and oaths we take, and the reasons we come into the profession is about alleviating human suffering. And yet it's extraordinarily going on and it's avoidable. Look what it's costing us in money, in efficiency. And quite frankly, 80% of our outcomes are determined by lifestyles and behavioral factors. 20% of our outcomes are purely medical. So that means we can make some alterations and we can do some things. But we talk about money all the time and about saving money. And look what happens with excess medical costs, untapped productivity, and wasted money per year that has the potential to do other things. Here you go, just so you can have a few more pieces of data to back your thinking. Just want you to take a minute to read that. I don't need to read it to you. There is a lot going on that leads to the suffering. What I want you to also particularly pay attention to is the fourth bullet. 40% of our colleagues that are in their first and second year of medical school still believe that Black people were not sensitive to pain as white people. In other words, they're prescribing less. They don't give the same dosage amounts. You heard earlier that I'm a part of doing work in a dental school, kind of an odd place for a nurse, but they're not using me in my nursing capacity. They're using me in the relational capacity, that communication between patients and the dentist. And you and I know that dental outcomes have a great deal of impact on a person's health. So when somebody comes and sits in a dentist chair and they're not numbed as they should be, and they can feel everything that's going on, or they're treated roughly, they're not likely to want to come back. You know, most of us dentists are not our favorite people. There's good reason for that. And yet, there is no health profession where biases and prejudices and stereotypes don't creep in. Give that a little thought. Just let that marinate. This is my last slide on disparities, because this is why social determinants of health have just really gotten a lot of attention. It's been around a long time. It's just now getting its light, okay? And when we talk about diversity, we aren't just talking about our Black constituents. We are talking about our Native Alaska Natives, our American Indians, our Native Hawaiians, Pacific Islanders, our Latina, our Hispanic colleagues, our Asian colleagues. It's a broad swath of people. The numbers matter because that determines market share, who you're likely to come into contact with, either as a colleague or someone that you care for. And we still have a system that prefers one group of people over another, that treats them differently. It's embedded in the fabric. That's that insidious piece that I was talking about earlier and that Isabel Wilkerson was talking about. So, one of the banes of our existence in this country is racism. And we don't often like to talk about it, but you can't take care of things that you don't talk about. So we have to hold dialogues around how racism works. So I want you to see this framework. So this is Dr. David Williams' work around the house that racism built. You can see how these things swirl together. There's the sociological piece. There's the political piece. And I want you to hear when I say political, political means resource allocation. That's what politics is about, resource allocation. Who gets what? And who doesn't get included and who does get included. And as you can see, there are stereotypes and implicit and explicit biases and stigma, the ways we think about each other, the ways we are educated, what the institutional bent is, which plays in the culture, as well as the individual piece, the systemic racism. So what I want you to also hear or think about is when you think about stereotypes, I want you to think about it is a form of identity theft. It steals the identity of someone because the stereotype puts a label on it, and the label is often not accurate. Think about a time when somebody put a label on you that really wasn't you, and then they treated you like the label that they placed on you. I happen to drive a Toyota, a Volkswagen Jetta. I tell that car every day it's a Rolls Royce. Just because I call it a Rolls Royce doesn't make it one. But I do treat it like it's a luxury car. So at the end of the day, what I want you to hear is that what we label things puts things on a path. And we need to be careful how we label each other. Remember I said about the narratives and the judgments? So unknowingly, we can put people on paths we didn't intend. And although we didn't intend it, the consequences are the same in terms of harm, in terms of oppression, in terms of not being understood. When you hear the word prejudice, I want you to hear about buried thoughts about somebody, deeply buried, so deep that they're automatic. And that has a way of influence us also in how we relate to our colleagues, our patients, the communities we serve. So I want to talk just a minute about some work I've been engaged in, and it's been some good work. I am the scholar in residence at the American Nurses Association as well, who's working on, with others, this National Commission to Address Racism in Nursing. We love to talk about the fact that we are the most trusted profession above all others, ministers, religious leaders, firefighters, all sorts of people who do wonderful, wonderful work in our world. And the polls have had us there for at least about 19, 20, or 21 years. And we have basked in that glory. But we also have racism within our profession. The thing about racism is that it seeps in. And every time we do a handoff of any kind, there's another chance for racism and bias to creep. So we're going to spend a little moment on thinking about this. So there were 4 organizations who actually put this commission together. And then they invited other organizations to join them in this work. So we've listed many of them. I heard the question about Black student nurses organizations, but there is a student nurse organization that's national that has an array of people, but this also has an array of specialty organizations in many areas of nursing that we needed to bring together to hold this honest, courageous dialogue. And I was asked to help guide and advise the thinking of the group and to help them with thinking about what they wanted to think about and then what did they want to do in this space. So one of my big assignments was to define racism from a nursing lens. There have been many definitions of racism in the world. But what we discovered is there was not one that was developed by nurses. And we all know that professions are cultures. It's kind of like religions or denominations are cultures. The way they do what they do, the way they see things. So we do think differently from social workers. And social workers and nurses think differently from physicians, and the way we approach our worlds are different. And so this was a big assignment. Not only was I helping to bring all these groups together to think about this, particularly pay attention to a couple of things in this definition, and something I forgot to say to you a minute earlier. And that is, whenever you see ISM after a word, I want you to think about it as it, S, scares, M, me. Go back to the root word. It's fear. Someone's race scares me. If it's gender, someone's gender scares me. And so there's reactions that happen because we are fearful. And in this definition, what I discovered as I proposed to develop this definition was that no one was talking about the ideology of superiority per se, in a way that I thought we as nurses think about it. And that is the moral suffering, the wounding of the heart and the soul. So while somebody may be physically wounded and it heals, this deeper wound that people carry, this suffering that people carry, is something that we're participating in. And yet we're talking about eliminating moral suffering. And not only that, but we're destroying the spirit of people. And it's one of the worst things we could do. So we got to take care of this in an intentional way. So pay attention to that word moral suffering, the physical harm that I'm talking about, and the perpetuation of systemic injustices and inequities. And it happens in all our systems, not in just the care system. It happens in the educational system. It happens in the political systems. So the 4 core organizations that brought all those other organizations together was the American Nurses Association, the National Black Nurses Association, NCMNA, which is our other, it's a coalition of several of other ethnic minority groups who are smaller in number within our professions, but who come together because they are in that underrepresented group of the demographics. And the Hispanic Nurses Organization. So this commission developed some work. And it did so by checking in with people to see just how much people are really, really experiencing or bearing witness to racism in the workplace by the definition we talked about. And here are the results. 3 out of 4 in the workplace. We listened to the stories of people across the country. And we probably held 30 or 40 of these listening sessions. Every session ended in tears. because people told their stories and how their heart, their spirit, their sense of personhood was assaulted. So it wasn't just our imagination running away with us. It actually was occurring. And what do we mean by moral injury? Here it is here. Something that challenges one's deepest moral codes and the ability to even trust in others or themselves. It is part of the reason we have such trouble getting trust in the healthcare system for the people who often need it the most. And by the way, the harm can be something one did, witnessed, or was done to them. So I believe that Dr. Fields has shared this report, but if you do not have it or you have not seen it, just go to the American Nurses Association's website and you can download it. There were 4 groups who developed the report. We realized as we were working on the report that we needed to talk about the history of how specialty organizations came to be, particularly around race and ethnicity. And it basically occurred because they were not being represented by their larger organization. They were being kept out of leadership positions. They were paying dues, but they were not getting benefits. They were not being placed on committees or leading discussions or voices even incorporated. And so they split out to come together with like people to get the issues out front. This report is about 100 pages, but you really need to read the historical perspective because this is where nursing gets boldly, courageously honest about what we did, how we treated each other. It is great work and it's a great example. Before you can move into the next space, you got to name it, claim it, and aim it. You got to name it first. You got to admit what happened. Revealing is healing. And this is what this was about. There are 4 sections in the report, if you don't want to read all 100 pages, that you can pull if you're interested in. There's one on policy, there's one on practice, there's one on education. And so you want to, those are smaller pieces. History has a section by itself, so it's not included in those work pieces, but you want those 4 areas. And you can pick the one you're interested in. If you're interested in research, we talk about how racism shows up in research, or how it shows up in clinical practice, or how it shows up in our academic institutions. Here's a brief outline for you. And it's just what I talked about, those 4 areas of education, policy, practice, and research. We published this in May. We did it in celebration of Mary Eliza Mahoney's birthday. And at the time that we released it, we had about 160 sets of comments received. We're now close to 500 to 600 of those. Because we have now introduced the conversation. But we've also shown, as nurses often do, how to do things with authenticity. So Victor Hugo says it best. It's powerful when an idea has its time and you pay attention to the time. And here's the fact. We should not be asking, did oppression or discrimination or bias take place, but rather, how did it show up? What did it look like? Because it's there. It's just a matter of, are we picking it up? Are we seeing it? Part of alleviating the suffering and the oppression is to pay attention to it. How does it look in 2020? It could look different from how it looked in 1950 or 40 or 60. But it's an overarching kind of thing that seeps in and finds its place, almost like water. And that is the question, because it's always around in one of these forms. And that requires some alertness by design on our parts. I just talked about how insidious it can be. You don't have to be hateful. You can just say, bless your heart. For this kind, but for these things to show up. It's what I call, and this is not a word in the dictionary, it's one of, I make up words sometimes when I can't find a word to capture what I want to say. So I call this nicety. N-I-C-E-T-Y, nicety. It's nasty with some nice on top of it so it doesn't look bad. Doesn't sound bad. Nicety. It's like a metaphor, you know, the cake's underneath the icing. And so we're really good at covering it up. That's why by design, you have to give it some thought. But in all truthfulness, we need to be truthful with each other. Racism is a public health crisis and a driving force of disparities. And it doesn't just hurt the people that it's aimed at, it hurts everybody. Just think about some of the stats I shared with you earlier. I often hear people go, do I have to put pronouns behind my name? You see why? Pronouns are a public health issue. When you don't acknowledge who's in front of you, it's an insult. And you just saw with that picture I gave you that hostility is not a necessary precondition for your discrimination, because it can be intentional or unintentional, and it doesn't matter which one it is. It hurts either way. It harms either way. Now, I have to tell you, you're looking at your dean, and you're looking at me, and you're looking at Sheldon, and you're looking at others, and I will tell you that problems do not age well. Some cheeses do, some wines do, and some people do. I just gave you examples. But problems don't age well, and we keep kicking this problem down the road instead of dealing with it. And it is going to take some work, because justice is a process as well as a goal. And it won't happen unless we give attention to it and we work on it by design. Yes, things can get better, but as you heard earlier, the work is not nearly done. But you have to start somewhere. In order to get into the becoming of space, you got to be. You got to have a place to start. And I think the work you're doing is good. So how do we move these nice words off the walls into the halls? Because I can tell you everywhere I go, there's a mission and a vision statement, and usually some value statement. They say wonderful things. Then I start talking to the people who live there, and none of what's being said or printed or shared, whether that's on their walls, and I mean, I'm also talking the walls of your web pages, is being lived out. They can point to, we said this, but we do this. That's that culture piece I'm talking about. So it is important for us to just spend a few moments. I just want to share a few ideas, I think, about how we can do that. And it starts with reckoning, a settlement of accounts. And the accounts mean that there's something owed to people, and usually it's dignity. It's decency, it's legitimacy. And there are multiple account types. So I've listed some of those for you. You probably could add some more to it. I wanted to jar your thinking a little bit. But what has gotten a lot of attention is out of the commission work, the American Nurses Association decided that it really needed to ask for forgiveness for those who it harmed by their ways of thinking and being and treating its members. And so it developed a reckoning statement. ANA has a reckoning statement that acknowledges what they did and asked for forgiveness. And that is just the beginning of the work, but that is a huge piece. Organizations need to do this rather than act as though they never did. I am not saying they should wallow in it, but I'm saying they should acknowledge it. Because people have memories. And they have letters, and they have stories that get repeated over and over and over. But this act of forgiveness, which we did not find in any of the other reckoning statements that other organizations have done, is an important piece. We are all human. We all have biases and prejudices and racist tendencies in our ways of thinking and being. None of us is perfect. So this is what it requires. This putting us in a place of humility and acknowledging what needs to happen. Secondly, we have to challenge the systemic bias because systemic problems require system solutions. And it starts with the truth. And then you work your way through it. There must be accountability measures. And again, I want you to hear, when I say accountability, accountability is a culture issue. It's what you allow, who you let get away with what. If you say something is on your a value, part of your mission or your vision, you hold people to it. So we hold students to behavior and a set of standards for what they must possess to be the best in their areas. We have faculty and staff who we must hold accountable for diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging, creating that environment. That means it has to be tied to performance. You can't get the ultimate recognition or the highest form of performance in your evaluation if you haven't been engaged in doing work in this space. How are you going to make it better? How are you going to acknowledge it? How do you do the self-work and the organizational work? So it's not only tied to evaluations and performance, it is tied to compensation. Because if you can't get the highest rating, you get lesser money. It has to move out of the so what category to it has an impact. One can choose not to do it, but then one is choosing some of the other consequences. And that's not a decision that's left up to the dean or the diversity officer. That's an individual decision. And that's the consequence. If they're going to stay in your space. It could be that for reasons you have, they may not stay in this space because that's not okay for everybody to be not engaged in helping the institution itself move into an equitable environment for all. But it is a common error that when you have a diversity council and you have a diversity officer, it is there to fix. And that is erroneous. What I told my colleagues is I don't teach all the classes, I don't make all the decisions, and I certainly didn't do all the actions that are coming to my office. So what happens when you come to my office is I help you with what to think about. And we talk about or co-create together how you might approach things in a different manner. But it's your work. It's not my work. People can't just go and do things and mistreat each other or talk in ways that assaults, that moral insult that I was talking about, and then bring it and put it on my desk and I'm supposed to fix it. This is a gross misunderstanding. So this work of being everyone's job is part of the acknowledgement that I hope you carry away today. Secondly, you got to get out of your why. You got to get into your why, not your feelings. I'm asking people to clean out the attics of their mind. You know, this time of year, we start going up in the attic and getting the winter clothes out, putting the summer clothes up, and we throw things away. And sometimes in the spring, people do spring cleaning. You have to do your brain that way too. Your head that way, your thoughts, because we do collect them. Hear me clearly, nice is not a skill and hope is not a strategy. Nice is not a skill and hope is not a strategy. Both are necessities for our world, but that's not how you get this moving. This requires action. It requires that resource allocation I talked about with intentionality, and then being willing to acknowledge your mistakes. So hear this. This actually came from my mother, who used to say this all the time to my two sisters and I, but I'm gonna tell you, this works on spouses, girlfriends, boyfriends, people. You cannot talk your way out of what you talked your way into. You behaved your way into, excuse me. You cannot talk your way out of what you behaved your way into. And unfortunately, people think that sometimes people can't pick up what they're thinking. But I want you to also hear a corollary to this, and that is private decisions often have public display. We think we have hid what we were really thinking. It has a way of showing up. And so when that behavior manifests itself, it's really hard to talk your way out of this. This is why intentionality, paying attention to what you're thinking, caring and seeing with the heart, because that is more important than the knowledge. What's going on inside of me? In order to be the most culturally relevant and appropriate, I've never used the word competent, because you grow every day and you change it. Competent is an arrival point, and in this work, you don't ever arrive. You're constantly learning and growing and adjusting. You want to be culturally relevant and appropriate with your colleagues and those you serve. And that requires some caring and seeing with the heart, not just the mind, but it's some heart work. It requires some shared equity leadership, some co-creation, because you've got to collectively make decisions about how you're going to be, how you're going to show up, as well as individual. There has to be agreement about what you're going to do and how you're going to be. So, and how you're going to act. This is why rules of engagement are important. That's in any committee or lead group. Lay out the rules about how you're going to operate so that everybody's operating from the same place. You level the playing field. And that is helpful, because when people walk in the room, they have different levels of power. So how you equalize that is to have these rules of engagement. You have different roles and obligations, but the power equivalent has to get leveled so that there is the freedom to talk about what needs to be talked about, that it's a safe space to talk about it. And by the way, when you create those rules of engagement, here's another point of accountability, hold people to it. When they violate it, you call them on it because you've all come up with these rules about how you will be in the space. What's okay, what's not okay. That's culture and accountability in its spot. I suggest that your goal is one of being excellent. And part of being excellent is to be inclusive. And this is a whole body of work around inclusive excellence. This term's been around since the 80s, but you haven't heard it much until in the last maybe 8 to 10 years around being inclusive excellent. But it's a worthy goal for you. You hear it, see that it talks about deliberate. That's the design, that's the intention. So that you understand and others understand what you mean by those terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this is about how you lead, how you operate day to day, how you make your strategic planning decisions, making your resource allocation and your priorities. And who doesn't want to be the best? Without diversity, you can't be the best. And without diversity, you can't have quality. So, inclusive excellence is an important goal to seek. So now I got a little exercise that I want to engage you all in because I've been talking. When you look at this picture, what do you see? I want you to pay attention and just write down, for those that are not in person here, write down for yourself your first impressions when you see this picture. For the people that are right in my presence, can you say to me what you just came to your mind as soon as you saw the picture? Somebody tell me, give me a word or two. What'd you think? Farmer? Okay, Dr. Field said farmer. What else? Gentleman? What else did you see or think? You're not being judged here, just say it. Yes. Lonely. I often hear older guy having trouble moving. That usually comes up. Kind of a dark feeling picture. Okay. Now I want you to look at this. Within 7 to 9 seconds, we make decisions about people. Almost within the blink of an eye. And it sticks like super glue. It takes a lot to remove the thought. In fact, we will spend time trying to prove that we were right. Confirmation bias. Okay? So I want you to remember that we form these opinions about people very quickly. And it's harder work when we don't push ourselves. So she said dark, and yet he was playing music. He was putting his feelings into a musical display. When you go 30,000 feet up and you want the bigger view, you get a bigger picture. That's what you need to do. So you must minimize certainty. Treat your brain like a computer. Minimize certainty and maximize curiosity. Ask questions. Understand that you don't have the whole picture. You just have the part that you hold. Before we make judgments, suspend the judgment piece and work to gather more information and more understanding. I'm asking you to think and act like a scientist. This is what we teach you. And science is all about asking questions, that relentless questioning of assumptions, that investigation of why there was a variation. Why did it work for some and not work for others? You want a testable hypothesis because there are folks who need that quantifiable piece, and it does help us shape what we know, where we need to go, and what else, more questions, so that we can give even better care. And we need to produce hard evidence about why this matters. That's why I gave you some of the disparity statistics at the beginning. This matters because people suffer. People die. People are treated unfairly. You will need also, in terms of your data analysis, a steep analysis. Pay attention to what's going on in the world demographically, what tools they're using, what's happening financially and how that impacts people. What's going on in the environment? COVID would be a great example of an environmental, new emerging diseases, for example. Not enough clean water, climate change. We cannot just be siloed in one space. We need to understand what's happening around us so we can make the best strategic plans and resource allocation. And I hate to tell you, but politics is alive and well and plays an important role. You got to be involved in who's making those decisions, who's allocating those resources, what do they believe? Does it fit with who you are and what you value? Quite frankly, steep analysis should be done every 6 to 9 months because that's how fast we're changing and we're rapidly moving. You're going to need some metrics. You're going to have to gather some things. So here's a few ideas of things you could be doing. Climate surveys and exit interviews. By the way, exit interviews when people leave should be done by a third party that is not a part of your institutions, because and it should be done within 3 weeks of the person leaving. Those are important pieces. These are things you should be measuring in the academic space, faculty around, and this is also for true of students, retention rates, your turnover rates, the time to tenure. And notice I disaggregated it by gender and race and ethnicity and age. This helps you to know what's going on in the environment. What are the yield rates for your recruitment? When you send out who comes in, who's not applying? Why are they not applying? What's keeping them from coming? And by the way, people are looking for people who look like them. They want to know they're coming into a space where they're understood. So this work of recruitment is an important work that all of us are also a part of. But there are very good reasons when people don't come into your space, and you need to work to find out why. What's the turnoff? On your webpage, your diversity information should not be more than 1 click away. You need to tell the truth about what your picture on the campus looks like. Faculty, students, staff. Important to have diversity of leadership. So that again, they're all points or all sides as best you can make it is at the table and is raising the questions and allocating the resources. You need to challenge SDOH. It doesn't just always mean social determinants of health. I want you to think about a preferred condition. How about seriously developing outstanding health? That's a flip. That's not only talking about the downstream, but it's talking about how do we make it better. It's the goals for the flourishing of the human environment, which is what we say we're about. I've talked about this already, but we've got to tie these things together. You got to connect the dots, the why, the how, and the what. So I placed that in a triangle because that is the work. And at the very top is performance excellence. That's the accountability piece. So you want to manage the ways of experience. We're in the experience business. And when experience shows up, it speaks. And when it speaks loud. And it usually shows up in one of these four ways: as a feeling, a thought, and action, or a sense of being. And so how we manage perception is important. How does it look for the people who weren't at the table? There are some questions you need to ask yourselves. I just gave a few examples here. So you want to consider your identity and lived experiences of your team members and your patients. That's why completing surveys that ask what's happening with you, how are things going? And if you don't tell people what they are, then they can't be addressed. That's why one needs to participate in such activities, where they self-examine as well as talk about what's going on with them currently. We talk about inclusion all the time, but it's a verb. It's not only just to include, but it's also an emotion, feeling legitimately included. I am a part of humanity. I am a significant part. Everyone wants to feel that sense of significance. So pay attention to this inclusion framework. I'm just going to do this quickly, and then I'm going to give us a chance to ask some questions. Do you see how in this framework there has to be, for inclusion, high belonging and high value and uniqueness? So you don't bring people in for diversity, the ways in which they're diverse, so you can count your numbers. You bring them in knowing that their difference is going to help improve, and it is what is needed. But you have to also value their uniqueness rather than trying to make them into who you are, just like you, a clone. So you bring them in and you say you won't change, you want diversity, but then once we get them, we work to make them like we are. And that won't lead you to excellence by doing that. So the gray one is where you want to be, high belonging and high value for uniqueness. Look again along in that framework, that high belongingness. The individual is treated as an insider and also allowed or encouraged to retain that uniqueness. That's the work when you say you're about inclusion. Think about people from an asset frame, not about their deficits, because when you start talking, defining people by their challenges, you stigmatize them. And that's the last thing we want to do. Think about it from a growth mindset, because that really benefits them. That acknowledges their aspirations. And your brain automatically brings it with belonging. You're going to need some reflection work, some self-work in order to get this. The dean cannot do it all. Your diversity officer or your council can't do it all. This requires self-work. That's why we incorporate it into our operations. And I just listed some questions that you might want to bring to the table as a beginning. These are only questions. So, people are asking you to see them the way they see themselves. You might think that because that cat's a kitten, looks like a kitten, that they see themselves as a small little kitten, when in fact they see themselves as a ferocious tiger. We had time, we play a game about how would you entitle this picture. They see greatness in themselves and they want you to see it too. So I'm ending with this quote from Fryer around legitimacy. I'm talking about profound respect for the cultural identity of students and faculty and staff and our patients. A respect for their language, their way of approaching their world, who they love and care about, their intellectual capacity, and their ability to be creative. And that doesn't just happen in thin air. It happens by intention. So my challenge to you is to be a rehumanization champion. Be an exclamation mark, not a question, not an asterisk, but a true champion. Because your now is not your next. Questions? You have questions?
Thank you, Dr. Alexander, for an excellent presentation. So I'm gonna look online, see if there's any questions, but if we also have questions, you can what it is.
So I'm gonna look in the Q&A here. So while we'll do that, does anybody in the audience here have a question for Dr. Alexander?
There's what?
So how should we go about explaining the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion to other sectors beyond nursing?
You're going to be a part of interprofessional education. You're going to be working with colleagues. So you want to create opportunities for people to learn about each other. What I found to be effective is inviting people to come to sessions like this. But I've done book clubs. I've had our theater group on campus play out a scenario and have the audience actually see something happen that is contrary to what we say we believe, and have them engage in conversation with the actors around, because the actors stay in character. Why did you behave this way? Blah, blah, blah. In fact, we did that once and faculty said, well, nobody here acts like that. And I said, I wrote the scenario. This is exactly what came into my office. This is exactly what you all look like. This is exactly what you did. I've had students who just graduated come back after they're graduated and talk about their experience when they felt that they could honestly talk about it because they were afraid of retaliation. And the panel discussion caused faculty tears where they talked about things that happened and how they were treated and how they felt, but they didn't feel safe talking about it. This is how you go to movies together or have a movie night, and you invite others into your space, and it's not to blame, it's not to embarrass, it's not to reprimand, it's to talk about who we, the collective we, operate and how we can be intentional in the space. Now we have an interprofessional education exercise that our students do every year with the whole health campus side, which is social work, pharmacy, nursing, dentistry, and med students. And they actually work through a case study together. And then they come back and talk about how they handled it. And you can see how different professions approach this work. Remember what I said about physicians come at the problem differently from a nurse or from a social worker, and they got to see how they were seeing it different. I am proud to say that usually the nursing students are the ones who lead the conversation because they've been the most immersed in it, which I think is wonderful. But we do have to work with other people. So it's good to approach our colleagues, not in a blaming way, but in a learning way, in a respectful way. And one of the best skills you can have is the skill of approachability. You know, if you're coming off angry and you're all up in somebody's face, they're not necessarily going to listen. So this is much about how you show up and the ways in which you show up. I also need you all to be allies for each other. Allyship is about bearing witness and calling things when you see them. So if I mistreat you, Dean, I say something and you see her trying to just collect herself. A good ally speaks up and says, I don't, listening to what's going on, I'm not sure that we've given her the full understanding, or we're misunderstanding each other, or this is what I know about this person. Allyship can be succession planning. It can be a good job recommendation. She'd be perfect for this work. It's about affirming their competence and their abilities. And you can go on and on and on. That is how you start. That is how you begin.
So there is a question here from Angela Moore. What are your thoughts about the majority of DEI positions being filled by Black faculty rather than white faculty? This work requires everyone to do this work. Oftentimes, there is an emotional price for those in these positions as they try to make changes that are not readily accepted by the leadership and the rest of the faculty.
Boy, I could spend days on that. That is about the fact that the role of diversity officers is usually not one where they have authority to make things happen. They have to convince other people to do it, the people with the power. That's why people burn out in the role, and that's why it's difficult. Okay, one, and the other pieces around the understanding I talked to you earlier about is everybody's job. But being a person from an underrepresented minority group does give you experiences that others have not had, but it doesn't necessarily qualify somebody for the position. There is a science to this work. The habit is to want to check boxes and say, we have one. We have a diversity officer, we have a diversity council, and then past that, it gets wild. This requires some work and some understanding, some preparation in order to do this work, because we're talking about equity and it doesn't have a race or a gender or a sexuality. Neither does talent and neither does opportunity. So one must know what they're moving in, because this is a highly emotive area. Nobody walks in this space without emotion. And anger is an equal emotion. Everybody has it. So the qualification isn't just about code. It's not even about race. I've also seen people do it with religious. They believe that people who are leaders of religious groups would be the most fair. And so they will sometimes default to that. Remember what I said about religions? They're cultures. They're denominations and cultures. Methodists believe they do things differently from Methodists, and Methodists from Presbyterian, and Presbyterian from Catholics or Episcopalians. There's a way in which they do that. And all of them have an in group and an out group. Or what I like to say when I'm talking to religious organizations, the saints and the ain'ts, who ain't going to heaven or the good place. And the saints, because they follow Sheldon's laughing, because he knows that is absolutely true. So this is also true. It plays itself out in our other groups and professions that we're a part of. And so that's an excellent question, because that's not the requirement. This is about understanding the work and the ability to do the work. And it's hard work.
So we have one last question. Any additional tips for introducing this topic in the work in the PWI when you are one of few Black faculty members? I'm starting by co-sponsoring a community forum regarding this topic of work in a few weeks. Thank you for your wonderful program today.
Thank you. Yeah, when you're in a predominantly white institution, it sometimes feels a little harder to move this along. And it does take this courage piece. But again, if you set those rules of engagement I've talked about, you make the case for why this is important. How it fits with who we say we are as an organization. and what we want to do. How you make the safe space for people to talk about their experiences. And sometimes that requires some anonymous reports until people get a sense that it is safe. It's kind of like taking baby steps, and you know, the baby wobbles at first before they get really good at walking and running. And so the work is around, how do you get the issues on the table? You must ask questions. One of my best skill sets, I think, is asking questions. And I will, if somebody says something that is feeling like somebody's getting advantaged and somebody's getting disadvantaged, it doesn't feel fair, I will ask, can you unpack that for me? Help me understand. One should never use I messages. You messages. You messages put people on defense. You did that. Person automatically needs to defend. You meant to hurt me. Over against I messages. I am the expert on, nobody knows me better than me. If I tell you it hurt, it hurt. You don't get to argue the point, and you don't get to label me a drama queen. It's kind of like pain on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the high. What might feel like a 3 to him might feel like a 6 to me, and both of them are true.
Mhm.
All right. In addition to that, we use the words microaggression and macroaggression. And we like to put a lot of things in the microaggression category. Oh, that was just minor. It was just a little mosquito bite. But guess what? The person who gets to decide whether it's micro or macro is the person that was the recipient of the harm or the insult or the slight or the being treated insignificant or being invisible. It's like that car I talked about, the Rolls Royce versus the, you can call that slight out, you can call that all you want, a minor thing, but if it's major to me, it's a macroaggression, it's not a minor. You have wounded my inner being, who I am and what I'm about. And that's not up for argument. What's up to is understanding why I feel that way, what happened, how did it show up? So that would be my answer for that.
Okay.
Great
Well,
questions.
Thank you all, and thank you everyone for attending today. We are a few moments over, so I'm going to bring the whole session to an end. Really want to thank Dr. Alexander for her excellent presentation. Thank you all for attending. Again, those of you who want to claim your CEUs, look in your email, click that link, fill out your evaluation, and you'll get your certificate. Again, on behalf of the Ross and Carol Neese College of Nursing here at Penn State University. We really want to thank you all for attending this inaugural Gunter-Gooding DEI lecture series. You have a note on here from Dr. Alexander that says, please send an insight on AHA to her from today's session. And you have her email address there, which is rume@email.unc.edu. Thank you all, and wherever you are, make the rest of your day the best of your day. Goodbye, everyone.